So once you have your camera positioned, the next step is to start placing some lights. So let's first place a target spotlight. Go to Create, select Lights, and Standard Lights, select Target Spot. Now this is going to simulate the sun for our scene. So place the sun. So I'm going to place the sun so that when it casts, when the shadows cast, they cast onto this main wall. I'm going to place my light on this side of our scene. To position your light, it's like positioning a camera. Click once with the left-hand mouse to initiate the placement, and hold down until you place the target. And again, it places it on the 0, 0 plane, so we need to raise the light up in the z-axis. So grab our light and move it up. Okay? Now let's test our rendering to see what it looks like. Okay, notice it's acting essentially as a spotlight and puts a big spot in the center of this. This is what's known as the hot spot. And so to make it cast over the entire thing, we can manipulate two values. One is the hot spot and the other is fall off. Fall off essentially allows you to gradually get darker rather than having a sharp edge, so it goes from bright to dark like this. So let's manipulate that light. But first, let's see the effects of our lighting by going to duplicating our camera view. So let's right click, Cameras, Camera 01, and this camera view, we want it to be an active shade. So right click on camera, come down to active shade. Active shade will allow us to interactively display the effects of our shadows. So if I move my light, it will update so we can see what the shadows are doing. So let's first come into the properties of our light here. So modify, and let's make sure that we have shadows turned on. So we want shadows on, and we want them to be ray traced shadows. Okay, sometimes when you activate the shadows, the active shade doesn't update with it. So I'm going to re-update my active shade now. Okay, now we can see that we have some shadows that are being cast from our light. So we want to manipulate in the spotlight parameters. We want to adjust the hot spot and the fall off. These are the main values we want to adjust. So let's first adjust the fall off. So bring the outside radius. Notice in my top view it's this dark blue line. So we want to bring the outside radius so that it goes past the boundaries of our geometry. I'm going to increase it a little bit more. And notice our scene is starting to look much better. And I'm also going to increase the radius of the hotspot a little bit so that it's not such a sharp change. Okay? And I also maybe want to change the positioning of the light a little bit. Okay, so I'm starting to like what the lighting is doing in the scene. Maybe I want to bring it a little bit closer. Okay, so let's do a test render to see what our shadows are doing. So go to render, rendering, and then render. Our scene is looking pretty good, but we need to also place some fill lights to lighten up these really dark areas in the model. So to do that, I like to place several Omni lights in the scene to act as fill lights. So let's do that. Go to Create, select the Omni light. For these, we want the shadows turned off, and I'm going to place one Omni light, and I will place it over here. Notice it made the scene really bright. So first, let's modify that light so that we have a multiplier of about 0.3. As a general rule, most of the fill lights I changed multiplier to about 0.3. Next, I want to make instances of this light to surround the model. Let's see. Hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag a light over to this side of the model. I'm using the Move tool again, and it gives me this option once I hold down Shift. You can either have a copy or an instance. In my case, I'd like an instance, and I'll show you why in a minute. So let's make a few more instance copies of this. Okay, now let's take all of our lights and let's move them up in the Z a little bit. So what an OmniLight is it essentially, starting from the origin point, emits light in all directions going on forever by default. So in order to manipulate this light further so it looks nicer in the scene, we have to adjust and tell our OmniLights when to end and how and when to end the light and how sharply do we want it to end, kind of like we did with the fall off on the target spotlight. So let's and there's basically a few things that we want to manipulate when we do that. So first we have to again, in modify, we have to take our light, and in the intensity tab we want to turn the decay to inverse. So essentially we're telling it to stop at a certain point. Now there's one more value that we have to adjust, and that's the far attenuation. So we want to show what is being affected, and we want to also use that in the calculation of the light. And what that is the ending point, so the starting point of the end and the ending point of the end. It's a little bit confusing, but if you look at this, past this outside brown radius, there is no more light. And at this second inner radius, it starts to end. So this is the start of the end and the end of the end. And now it starts, it's sort of infinitely brightest within this radius, and then gradually starts to fall off. So it's as bright as it can be within this green radius. So we want to manipulate these three values so that you have all of our ending points overlapping, and then we can turn the starting points also a little bit overlapping. Again, this is why I made them as instances, so if I change one, they all change. So let's see what the effect of this in our lighting is. Let's do a test render to check the effect of the lighting. So overall the lighting's getting better, but it's still a little bit too dark around these edges, so maybe we want to go back to our target light and manipulate the fall off value. So let's take our light, and now we want to adjust the spotlight parameters so that we have a larger fall off, and we'll keep increasing that until we start to see that these are brightening up. Okay, now let's do another test rendering. Okay, so it's pretty good to start working with. In the next tutorial, we're going to apply materials and then go back to our lighting conditions afterwards to make minor adjustments.